climate risk is here to stay. Political will per se is not going to make it disappear. People think that ESG investing is investing with the fundamental social agenda, which is definitely not true.
Okay, Fabrizio, why don't we get started? Thanks for taking my call.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
I know you are busy preparing new pieces, new papers, new ideas as you are on a sabbatical. I thought it would be good to talk a little bit about sustainability, ESG. We'll get into that in a second of what this really means and whether it's a good word. And you are very much involved in this. You are the founding director of our Sustainability Institute. But maybe to get us started, when we talk about sustainability, how do you explain it? When you talk about your work in sustainability, how do you explain the concept and why it's important?
Yes, I think it's particularly interesting to talk about sustainability and ESG these days because there is, I think, a general perception that it's becoming less relevant for corporation because of a changed political environment, especially in the United States. But I think this is a mistake. So, I mean, I'm currently working on a book project on, let's call it the rise and fall of ESG. So since I've been following basically this field for more than 20 years, so I think this was a very good time to do so. But I think there is a lot of misconception as well about what ESG is, particularly because it has been politically weaponized in the last 5 years. People think that ESG investing is investing with the fundamental social agenda, which is definitely not true. The term ESG was developed as a risk assessment tool. So in the investment space, the concern is that environmental, social, and governance factor can actually translate into a material risk for companies. Therefore, any reasonable investor should actually examine them and, of course, arrive at their conclusion about whether these factors are actually a risk, and therefore, their exposure to the risk should be evaluated. I'm using the term ESG, even though, again, probably we're going to be using sustainability as a generic term a lot more, but I think it's the same idea. We're looking at sustainability primarily, I would say, from a corporate perspective as a way to identify potential risks for the business and sometimes potential opportunities. While, of course, there is an ethical aspect to it.
So there is a political interpretation. There has been a political interpretation going on, and that takes place obviously in a context that involves other issues. ESG, you mentioned it's in the first place a way of assessing risks in three broad areas. And so if we stick with that focus for a moment, how is it working? I mean, it's been around. You mentioned you've been involved and working on ESG, sustainability related topics for almost 20 years. How is the implementation actually now going? Because we understand that the risks are real, so therefore informed investors will want to know about it. How is this going? How good is the assessment, the understanding of the ESG implementation?
I think if we go back in time, maybe not 20, but even 10 years ago, frankly, we did not have any data to seriously assess the materiality of this risk because we fundamentally were not measuring environmental and social performance. So for many years, most of the focus of ESG investors, or I would say proponents of sustainability, has been to try to actually measure this performance. And of course, this requires disclosure from corporations. So perhaps this is why, especially in Europe, we are seeing now a lot more regulation around disclosures coming up, because everybody agrees that if we want to take seriously these factors, we need to measure them, we need to be able to compare them, and this is very hard. But I think we are now in much better position than we were even just 10 years ago to do so. not everything is materially relevant. So not everything is going to be a risk factor or maybe a business opportunity for every industry. Climate change, as important as it is, and carbon emissions are going to be more material for some industries than others. All companies should try to reduce them, but the reduction of companies in some service industries are not particularly relevant, while the ones in industrial, of course, energy and other high-emitting industry are much more relevant. And that's the first stage for companies then to decide what their strategy in relation to these issues should be. Even in the same industry, different companies with different strategy will be affected differently. And they can choose strategies that will make, for instance, them, let's say, more resilient, to stay with the carbon example, to a carbon tax. Maybe to give a practical example, airlines. I think airlines, there is going to be a fundamental difference between the ones that do primarily short-haul flights versus the longer intercontinental flights. Because everything else equal, is very likely that the short-haul flights will be less viable in a context with some level of carbon tax, because there are alternatives. Long intercontinental flights, we really just don't have alternatives, so it's unlikely that they will be penalized. So this introduces reflection for both boards and executives, and of course, investors on the other side.
Maybe one last question. How about, so 2025, we're at the beginning of 2025. The day we're recording this is the day the Davos meeting is starting, that President Trump will be inaugurated. So the beginning of, a very significant date, and from many different aspects. If we look just at Europe, 2025 will also be, as far as I understand, a year of more standards coming out. And we started with you saying that ESG is about investment criteria. That has converted also into standards in general for the economy, for different sectors. What can we expect to happen in 2025, maybe as a final word?
In 2025, obviously, while the regulatory environment in Europe has been very well established and is going to probably continue to move in a direction that is definitely driving more attention and more scrutiny on sustainability performance of corporations. The United States is likely to go the other way, which is slowing down implementation of new carbon-related regulation that were coming up from the SEC, and probably removing even more regulations that were, let's say, creating an environment more friendly to this. So, on the other hand, I still believe that the most material of these environmental and social factors will remain material, no matter what the political ethos is. And therefore, climate risk is here to stay. Political will per se is not going to make it disappear. What can happen is that the perception of the risk will be reduced in the general population. So, but every once in a while, there will be events that will frankly make it more clear that this is something we have to deal with. A lot of labor-related and human resource and people-related issues are very material. So regardless of regulation, companies will continue to prepare and develop and try to do things in a way that makes them more truly sustainable.
Well, thank you, Fabrizio. Of course, the issues that you refer to are also issues that need a lot of managerial work, leadership work. The institute you're leading is called Sustainability and Leadership. So leadership and sustainability. So it's very much connected, and that's something that also is something we are working on, no? From a perspective of educational and research perspective at the school. Let's see how 2025 will turn out. And we're looking forward to your book that you referred to at the beginning, and we'll maybe at some point also talk a little bit more about the institute in a different call.
Yes, I still believe that especially large global corporations, are called now to an important test of their leadership. and gain leadership. It's easy when everybody's going the same direction. It's not as easy today because clearly we're not all going in the same direction. And then we will see. So looking forward to 2025 as a very interesting, perhaps challenging, but important year for the future of sustainability. Thank you, Franz.
Thank you, Fabrizio.